Switch it over to the panel view real quick. I am Ari Engel, the Director of Creative Community for Peace. Welcome to our virtual panel on the state of the film and television industry during the time of COVID-19. I'm just going to make some brief introduction of our panel. There we go. Everybody's lovely faces. To briefly introduce everybody, we have a great panel assembled today. Many of them are on our advisory board. We have Craig Emanuel, who is a partner and attorney at Paul Hastings, who has represented clients such as Ryan Murphy and Lin-Manuel Miranda. Michael Adler is a partner at Leichter, Grossman, Nichols, Adler, Feldman, and Clark, and represents a broad spectrum of companies and talent in the film, television, and new media. His clients include Academy Award and Global Award-winning directors, writers, and actors. Gary Foster has produced some of everyone's favorite TV shows and movies, including Sleepless in Seattle, Short Circuit, one of my personal favorites, and the TV show Community. David Lonner is the former co-head of the motion picture department at William Morris, and now has his own management firm and has represented talent such as J.J. Abrams. Scott Kluge is the president of Tremendous Entertainment and produced a number of independent films, such as the film Blind, starring Alec Baldwin and Demi Moore. Jeff Russo is famously a member of the band Tonic, and now an award-winning composer who has composed music for many amazing films and TV shows, such as Fargo and the upcoming Star Trek Picard. And Gabriel Mann, another amazing composer, most notably for the television show Modern Family, which he composes for and also wrote the theme song. Lastly, our moderator is Noah Pollack, a longtime television industry executive who also hosts a podcast called Exec Producer. We will have some question and answer session at the end, so feel free in the Q&A button in Zoom to leave some questions, and hopefully we'll leave a few minutes to get to them. Welcome everybody on Facebook Live as well, and I'll turn it over to you, Noah.
You're on mute, Noah.
All right, beautiful. Off mute. Hi, everyone. Since we only have an hour here, and since pretense has been thrown out the window, I'm just going to hop right to it. Welcome to all of our panelists, and thank you very much, Ari, for hosting this panel. So, let's start with Jeff and Gabriel, our two composers, our two artists here. One thing I think the most immediate effect of this, obviously, is the workflow has been changed significantly, right? And I'd be curious from your vantage, how it's affected the work you do composing music for film and television. I mean, maybe in some ways you're less affected because you already were working in some cases remotely, but I imagine there's still been some challenges. Would love your perspective, Jeff and Gabriel.
Jeff, you go first.
Oh, sure. As composers, I think we're sort of used to being isolated anyway. We're sort of used to sitting in a room by ourselves and writing and working. For me, there were a number of projects that had already finished production, so I'm able to continue to write the scores. I'm continuing to write the score for Star Trek Discovery, third season. I've been writing the fourth season of Fargo. Some things have stopped production and will resume production when possible, and some things continue post-production. The one thing that it has significantly affected me on is the ability to record live musicians together in a room. So I've had to figure out how to do the orchestral sessions without actually putting 40 or so people in a room to do that. So I've had to figure out how to make sure multiple individuals can record at home and layer themselves, so I can sort of put it all back together and make a virtual orchestra. The other issue is I usually work in my studio, and now I brought home a computer so I can write at home, which is always a little bit frustrating because there's not as much ability to focus and separation of work and home life. But other than that, like just seeing post-production come to a grinding halt where they're not able to continue because production is not able to continue has been sort of alarming, obviously. But we do and are able to continue some form of work because we usually just sit in a room and write. Gabe?
Well, my experience has been a little bit different. Just in that the shows that I've been working on, mainly a million little things and a couple other comedies, network comedies, they were all essentially finishing right as this was ramping up. So for my personal schedule, it kind of aligned nicely. So as I was finishing the season finale of A Million Little Things, I was basically told I can't go to work anymore. So, and I also have a separate studio, as Jeff does, separate from my home, which is actually not the norm. I think most composers of TV, at least, have a studio at their house. So most of them are able to continue doing stuff if there's stuff still in progress. That said, the next thing for me is pilots. Typically at this time, I would be like drowning in pilot stuff, and that is at a complete standstill. I don't know of any pilots I think there was maybe one pilot that had finished shooting, one network pilot, that is. But other than that, they were all sort of on pause until further notice. So I'm essentially on sabbatical, and I'm polishing the silver, and I'm cleaning the windows, and I'm cleaning my daughter's room with her. And that's what's happening at my house.
You and everyone else. Do either of you have any, since you have some experience with working remotely, any great advice for all of us who are now doing it for the first time?
I mean, for me, doing remote spotting sessions and doing remote reviews and meetings and stuff is not, it's not outside of the norm. Being in a room with somebody is always a little better, having a direct interaction with people, but it has always worked for me to do it this way, so it doesn't really change much. It is interesting to see other people have to adjust to that being the new norm, and that I think has been a little frustrating for people. But now I think with all of the network traffic that we have on the internet, we have more and more of a problem getting people to be able to do it and have it not be an issue.
All right, so now let's move on to our producers here, because you both mentioned obviously the pilot season coming to a halt, and it's one thing to have things to work on in post-production, but eventually production shuts down and there's nothing left in post-production. Would love to hear from the producers, from Gary and Scott and David. Are you able to sell anything right now? I know networks and studios are still taking phone calls and still having meetings, but are they actually buying anything, or is this more cursory and more just basically managing the stuff that's already in there? Gary, I don't know if you want to go first for that question.
Sure. In my experience, they are buying, which is a good thing. Look, this is nobody likes, I think, sitting on their hands and doing nothing. And yes, there's either you're winding down a production or winding down pre-production. But look, a lot of our time is spent developing and interacting with people remotely anyway, phone calls, etc. So
why wouldn't you be listening to that? You have to be listening and reading.
Somebody else is talking.
You're just listening here.
Anyway, so what we're doing at this point is working on closing deals that were in progress. We have had a couple of sales calls, both on the film and TV side, with mostly streamers, to be honest, but they are listening. And there are those projects that we are trying to attach talent to, and it's a great time because a lot of people are reading, because that's what we can be doing right now. And so we're getting material out, and we are getting fairly swift reaction, which is nice, because that's rare. Usually it takes weeks and weeks on end. But yeah, on the development side, at least from my perspective, while it's a bit unorthodox, it's still moving forward in a way where we can be productive and make some sales.
Scott, do you want to pick up next on your experience, on putting together your projects?
For sure. In the independent film world, I'm very optimistic in the sense that as this goes on and productions are down for indie producers, it might be a little bit easier for them to get into production as soon as things normalize because they're more nimble. The studios are a bigger machine. It might take them some more time. So it might create some value for the independent film world and the projects that they're going to come. So we had 2 films we were pretty close to, listen, we know in the film world, it's a chessboard and you need all the pieces to be in place to go into production. But we were very close and we feel confident now that when things normalize, we'll be able to shoot and get a picture together very quickly. And we think there's going to be an enormous demand for content, especially from the streamers. I spoke to some friends at the streamers where now they're reviewing content that's been submitted and they've been passing on it. They're considering it. So they're really looking for new and fresh content. And I think it'll be quite a valuable time for that.
David, have you felt with your clients and with your productions that you're, quote unquote, polishing off your silver and developing more and dusting off things that maybe were sitting around for a while? Or, what has been your experience in making new sales over these past couple of weeks?
Well, for me, and I can say this because it's during Passover time, I'm kind of cleaning out development, that I've done over the last few years that at this point I deem that I'm either not interested anymore or given what I feel like the radical shift in what the zeitgeist is going to be. So I'm carefully evaluating the type of content, at least that I'm developing personally. But I'm also encouraging all the artists that I represent. I mainly represent writer-directors to write like hell right now because I agree with Scott. I think the moment this thing stops, I think the studios and the streamers are going to be really, really hungry for content. And in this particular moment, there's so much to be said about the state of the world, the state of the human condition. So, yeah, I mean, the work is nose to the grindstone right now. Yes, the studios and the streamers are all definitely acting as buyers. I think in order to sell something, you've got to package it with some, a sexy director, a sexy star. This Ryan Gosling book that the book that Ryan Gosling attached himself to, written by the author of The Martian, stuff like that's always going to sell and probably sell for a premium like it did before. But I think that there's a lot of reevaluation I'm doing personally, and I'm hoping my clients are doing about the kind of content that we're making. Not to stand on a soapbox, but I'm not sure the level of nihilism and world destruction that has been part of a lot of our content will kind of move to the next, to the next step that we're moving to in our pop culture. I know for me personally, joy has become something that I'm so desperate for when I'm watching TV. I mean, I'm loving some of the stuff that I've seen, like the show 000 on Amazon or Devs on Hulu, but I also want to laugh. So I'm grateful for, Curb Your Enthusiasm and Better Things and things that just make me, feel better about where we are right now.
Right, so Michael and Craig, as the deal makers, and sounds like maybe a lot of deals are going to be coming your way, if not right away, but pretty soon you might be pigs in shit with all the amazing content that's going to be going out, and coming your way. But there's going to be major financial implications, I think, for all this too. I mean, it's one thing to buy a lot of stuff, but then how do you buy it when you don't know when it's going to start? To say nothing of the sort of financial mess that we're going to have to clean up for all the things that were just pushed or canceled altogether. Craig, what's your sense of are the deals going to be structured somewhat differently with this indefinite start date? Are you still, I'm sure, working out the implications of how much your artists are owed and if they're ever going to see that money?
Sure. Firstly, let me just make one small disclaimer. It is true that I represent Ryan Murphy. I do not represent Lin-Manuel as much as I would like to. I do represent Anthony Bregman, who's producing in the Heights for Lin-Manuel. I think just, from my perspective at the moment, I'm finding the workflow incredibly busy. And in fact, I think these last couple of weeks, I have been as busy as I've ever been. I think to echo the thoughts of, what the three producers have said, there is still a tremendous amount of development going on in our industry, in part because there is always this great demand for content, and I don't see that going away. And if anything, particularly as people are faced with spending more time and watching content at home until there is an adjustment period that takes place, the demand for content is always going to be there. I think when you think about, shows that are already successful on TV, the studios and networks producing those shows are not going away, and they're not going to cancel those shows because they represent core content for those studios. So we're seeing, the ongoing development of new seasons of those shows. You're seeing spin-offs being developed of successful franchises. And I'm also still seeing a lot of active buying of new content, both on the TV side as well as on the feature side. Look, development is something that takes a certain amount of time. So I think part of the theory is that we're going to continue to develop, and when the world says that we're ready to go back into, production, then we will be armed and ready. And in the same way, when there's always been rumors of a Writers Guild strike in the past, people tend to write up in advance. And I think that during this period of time, there's a lot of writing going on. I think on the financial challenges, look, there's clearly a huge financial challenge going on in our business at the moment for those people who have been involved in production, where production has come to a grinding halt. And in those cases where the studios or networks are sending out force majeure notices, they're contractually obligated to pay what is contractually due up until that point in time. They are not contractually obligated to pay anything beyond that. And I think with rare exceptions, they haven't done a lot of that, because once they kind of make a compromise for one person, then, they can't be seen to be acting in a discriminatory practice against, other people in similar circumstances. As to when production is going to get up, I think it's an unknown quantity. I think that, once people are allowed to return back to their offices, it's going to take longer for production to get ramped up. I think there is going to be a resistance of talent to travel. I think until people figure out how do we create work environments that are safe for people working in these productions, that's going to take time. And so I think the actual ramp up in production is going to have a lead time that's longer than just when people say, it's safe now to leave the homes and go back out, onto the streets. Look, I think the financing of production is going to go through a change. I think on the independent side, production's has always been about allocation of risk. And here, there are going to be issues raised on who is going to take the risk on these kinds of force majeure events. And undoubtedly, there are going to be new forms of insurance that will become available in the marketplace that people are going to need. We saw only a few months ago when studios and distributors and networks decided they wanted to have the ability to cancel broadcasting and releasing of content where there were key members of projects that were caught up in the Me Too movement. And you've looked at insurances being evolved to address those issues. So I think there is going to be a restructuring of the financing of our business and the allocation of risk and how we protect against that. But at the end of the day, during the Depression, people went to the movies. And it was a substantial thing. And today, in this period of time, people want content, and they're used to seeing a lot of fresh content. given the production of a large number of new series each year. So I'm incredibly bullish and optimistic about the future of our industry. Is it going to go through a change? Absolutely, but the core business is going to be there.
Michael, Craig mentioned how busy he is. I have to imagine the same is true for you, or at least it's coming your way.
It is. There's a lot of material that actually, including acquisitions of films that happened right before the end of the year when all of this was tumulting forward and before it really became as critical as it is now. I think I share Craig's thoughts that I think that things are going to be good, but I think there are going to be changes in all sorts of. There'll be more this issue of media consolidation. There's been a tremendous amount. I think there are going to be survivors and those who may not survive as well. How do you compete against AT&T when you're an independent producer? It's a tough situation, particularly when you're dealing with a company that's vertically integrated. So I think those kinds of things. I think the main thing I see is talent will prevail. That's always been the case throughout the history of the movie business. Notwithstanding bumps, they're gonna be those kinds of bumps, but they're gonna be great opportunities as well. If you're a producer or you're a director and you can direct a movie that does not cost as much as The Irishman did, which Netflix, I'm sure, is not as happy as they would have been had it costs a lot less, but you can make a movie for a couple $1 million and sell it at a premium to one of the streamers because they're going to need the content and they're not going to get it supplied at a cost. So I think one of the trends you're going to see is real efficient production. I mean, I think the issues, and that's going to be offset by the requirements of safety on the set. So you figure out how you can make a movie on a soundstage when you just had a pandemic or whatever the case. And I guess the last thing I would say is in the case of art imitating life, I was involved with a film about 11 years ago called Contagion, which if none of you have seen it or any of you have not seen it, it's a movie that tracks basically everything that's happened in a frightening sort of sense, and it was ahead of its time. And just as our culture has art, plowing in the future for the changes that we'll see, I think you're going to see the same thing happening here. I mean, some of the issues, I would just say two other things. One is some of these issues, I think the whole movement to video on demand was accelerated by this situation. I think it was headed in that direction. I hope people want to see movies together, but I'm afraid there are going to be a lot of empty auditoriums. And then the whole question of the basic model. Are you going to have a subscription TV/content arrangement, or are you going to have something different? Are you going to have advertising mixed up on some basis with subscription? I think all that's going to change. And I said, in terms of the survivors, how do you launch a Quibi at the beginning of all of this? Is there enough content, to fill the pipeline, and is there enough demand for that content? I think those are all questions to be seen, and as they unfold, and that's kind of how I see it. But I do come back to what I said at the beginning, which is basically talent will prevail. If you have people that you represent or that you work with, whether you're a producer or director or whatever, or writer, producer in television, those people, ultimately will prevail.
Well, and I'm going to come back to the composers here in a second, but sorry, jump ahead to the producers as a follow-up to something you just said, Michael. But, the acceleration of the on-demand nature of just sort of everything. I mean, obviously things were trending in that direction, but now you've seen studios are obviously they can't put it in theaters, right? So movies are coming straight on demand, new release movies. Everyone is watching Tiger King, in a way that I'm sure Netflix is very happy. For you, for the producers on this call, starting with you, Gary, is this just completely accelerated and shifted your targets to the streamers? I mean,
Well, that's happened
anyway,
ago
but is it
anyway.
light
But
speed ahead?
well, I'm going to go with what Michael just said. I think at the end of the day, content and talent prevails. So I'm continuing to do what I've always done, which is find great material, try to get it funded, find the right artists, the right talent to create it. And at the end of the day, when this opens up, whether it becomes a streaming piece or a feature film or something for, you know, traditional cable or television, it'll find its spot. But everybody needs the content. And, you know, I've always, for years, I always said I'm a film producer or do some television. Now I'm a content provider, right? Content developer and provider. And that is my laser focus. Because no matter what the platform is, they're going to need the software, and we create the software.
Scott, for you, I know slightly different because you also produce Broadway, right? And things that require those audiences that Michael just mentioned. You're also the only one on this call, I believe, that's in New York City right now. So, you know, would love to hear your perspective on, again, on the ground in New York, but also where something like Broadway goes from here.
Very smartly. Broadway is in a very, very tricky time. And it's always been a very tricky space. So we've really been focusing on film and television. One of the things I've been monitoring in the feature world is I believe all the studios have been organically headed to having their own streamers. And what that's going to do is really force the OTTs from today to really focus on original content. And again, for content providers, I think it's very powerful for us. Listen, as far as New York, guys, it's an unprecedented time. It's a ghost town here for the most part. The numbers that are coming in the next couple of weeks are scary, but I'm very optimistic. We don't want to get into politics, but you know, they're getting these testing out, and I think that's the tests are really going to help us with information and bring us back to production. There was so much production going on here right before this pandemic came, and we were very hopeful that it'll return very quickly. And again, I think independence might happen a little more quickly than the studios. And travel's a big thing. And there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of crew in New York. So I think that's an upside too. And obviously in Los Angeles as well. But there's so much filming going on down south in the Carolinas and Atlanta. So the question is, are people going to be open psychologically to getting back down there into different locations? That'll be interesting to watch and see what happens.
Yes, very much so. I mean, hopefully there will be this just major, I don't know, explosion of content when we do have this magical day that all this is lifted. And I guess going back to the composers, you know, the artists on this call, Jeff and Gabriel, when all this product comes back your way, you know, high class problem, but are you equipped to make far more than you've ever had to make before? And I guess also to that point, what would be your advice to, you know, fellow artists and maybe some other friends and colleagues of yours who are probably hurting right now, waiting for the work to come that may not come for a bit?
You know, I kind of think that things that were canceled will hopefully come back because they've just been pushed as opposed to like go away. I think that the projects that had already sort of gotten some momentum that needed to stop will hopefully come back. I do sort of worry about you know, having a glut of backlog, meaning like I can write and I can do what I need to do on the stuff that is now, but I'm worried that at the time that things that were going to happen over a longer period of time are going to be required to be done on a much shorter time schedule because people want to get things finished and done with all this break that's happened. So that's a little bit of a scary prospect, although yes, that would be a great problem to have. But you know, having to prepare for that might be something that is difficult, I imagine. Gabe?
I mean, I agree with that to a certain extent. I also think that it sort of presents an opportunity for not as established writers of music and all kinds of other things. When there's that much work, and this is sort of we're in a time now where there's so much content in general. It's just been an explosion of content over like the last 10 years. And as the producer is saying and the lawyers are saying, it's not stopping just because of this. There's a pause, but things can happen during that pause that then will result in this glut, as you're talking about. And I think that basically, you know, when that happens to me, and I'm sure this happens with Jeff also, you just sort of, you have to sort of gear up your team of people that help you. And that creates opportunities for younger composers and younger orchestrators and people that are on their way up, and people that may be at your same level that are just not plugged in at that particular moment. And so there's plenty of, in other words, it may require some patience until the flood eventually comes, but there will certainly be this flood. And I think Jeff's exactly right about this sort of, people are going to want a quicker turnaround. That's what I think is coming for people on this sort of, on our end of it, is that the turnaround is going to be, they're going to be like, we got to get this out and get it out now. And that's going to create stress.
Certainly the things that were in the middle, that stopped in the middle, that will then need to pick up where they left off. Those are things that I think people are going to be like, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. We got to get this done. We got to get this done because we want to get it out. But you're absolutely right. It will create a lot of opportunity for people that are at a different level of where they're at, because people like you or like me or even other people in the same position are going to be needing to even beef up teams to get more help than we may have needed before because of that scheduling problem. All of a sudden there's way more stuff to do in a way shorter amount of time as opposed to over a longer period of time, which so I think that it can form a really good opportunity for people who are trying to do what we do.
Next series of questions are for specific for David and Craig. You know, CCFP, our reason for coming together today, is right. It aims to achieve peace through the arts, specifically in Israel. And a lot of people have mentioned. I know Scott, you just mentioned just even travel to the Carolinas and Atlanta, you know, being on pause, let alone international travel. And, you know, I guess the question here is, do you think the global nature of this pandemic will reinforce to everyone that we are all in this together, and sort of accelerate the global nature of television and film and obviously with streamers that go, you know, in 180 countries overnight? Or do you foresee a future where we all become more insular and more, you know, worried about our own backyard with so many people hurting financially and, you know, just needing to actually produce with the colleagues that live down the street from you? I mean, David, starting with you, what sort of, you know, sort of immediate future do you see and the effect it'll have on international production?
I mean, listen, well, first of all, if you can't hear the message that I feel loud and clear right now, that we are all connected, right? All connected, forget about borders, forget about walls. I mean, yes, of course, we are all kind of hunkered down right now in our respective cities, states, you know, country, but, you know, we all, Israelis, Palestinians, you know, Italians, Americans, it's like we're all human beings, and I feel like by the time we're out of this situation, that message will be ever more prominent. And I think if you look at the trends that are happening right now with international production and you know, content that has multi-language you know, dialogue going on all the time. I mean, I just you know, binged through this show on Amazon called 000, which was Italian, English, and Latin American. And that's the real world. And I think that was happening already. And I think as a result of this, it's going to happen even more and more.
What about you, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo what David has to say. I think, you know, whenever you have a crisis, there is going to be a period of time where people rethink, you know, their strategies. If you think back to, you know, what it was like after 9/11, people decided they wanted to stay home, you know, for a period of time. But, you know, history has shown that we moved past that moment of insecurity. And I think that, yeah, do I think there's going to be a reluctance in the short term about people getting on planes going to Louisiana or any of these places? Yes, but ultimately people have to work. And so where the work is going to be generated, people are going to go there. You know, I have a client who's involved in writing and producing a very substantial television series, you know, for Disney Plus that's supposed to be going into production, you know, at Pinewood. And, you know, it's a very, very expensive show, and that's going to offer employment to a large number of people over a reasonably long period of time. And there is no doubt in my mind that people will get to the place where they're comfortable and being in one location. And it's going to be a function of, you know, these producers and studios and networks making sure they're creating an environment for people to, you know, feel safe and work. And I think people can get as safe working at Pinewood as they can working in Shreveport as well. So I think that will change. I also think, looking to the bigger picture, which David also alluded to, I also agree. I think that the number of productions I'm seeing taking place now that are co-productions involving, you know, a large number of different territories and countries, it is only going to continue to grow. And I think for, you know, the message and the mission of, you know, why this organization came into existence, I'm excited about the prospects of what that's going to mean. I do think that, you know, you see commonality of human interest come together at moments, you know, like this. I mean, look what's happened in the Middle East in general over the last couple of years, when you have a common concern over Iran that's no longer just an issue for Israel, it's an issue for a large number of the neighboring countries. And I think that we are going to see this community of creative people continue to thrive. So I'm optimistic.
Well, I love that, and I love the optimism. And so let's talk about positives. And Michael, I think you're the perfect person. As a litigator, you deal with a lot of negatives, right? I'm sure you've dealt with some pretty, you know, tough things over the years. But I'd love your take here on really some more of the positives that you see coming out of this. You know, obviously it's a very challenging time, but there's always a silver lining, or at least I like to believe. And after you answer this question, just so the audience knows, we're going to switch to question and answer. So I encourage you to write in with any questions you have for our panel before we wrap up here.
I would just say that what I had said before, which is, I think this is a great time of opportunities. And just to be accurate, I'm a transactional lawyer, not a litigator.
I apologize.
I wouldn't have lasted long enough as a litigator. But I think they're good opportunities. I think it's important, by the way, since this is a call that deals with peace in the Middle East. You know, Israel's going through a tough time. If you read some of the Israeli newspapers and if you listen to some of the television, and they have 25% unemployment effective today, and they've controlled the virus on their end pretty well, but it's been, you know, and they're doing the cutting edge research on coming up with the plasma solution that has been talked about for several days. But I think they're great opportunities, both for the entertainment industry and for us as people, you know, in support of peace in the Middle East. And I think those two things conjoined can lead to, you know, I think optimism. And I think we have to have optimism, because otherwise, you know, I was talking to my grandson this morning because I have to do it on FaceTime because he's 4 years old, and his parents are having to explain to him what germs are and everything, not necessarily what a virus is. And obviously that's a difficult thing for a child to process, even when you do it in a way that they can filter it. But I think we have to keep that optimism. We have to plow forward, and good things will come if all of us work together.
When all of us work together, hopefully.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to switch to some question and answer here from our audience that's listening online. And first question here has to do with scheduling, and it's from Susan. And so maybe, Craig, this would be a good question, I believe, for you to answer. So if an actor is scheduled to shoot a movie in April and a TV show in June, and when people get back to work, what happens with that actor? Is the movie on hold? Does the TV show get pushed? Who's going to get, who's in first position here? And how is this domino going to affect, hopefully, this rush of productions that are going to come in?
Look, it is obviously an issue where people have scheduled, back-to-back productions, and each one I think is going to be handled, somewhat on a case-by-case basis. It very much depends if the first production was in a priority position and the obligation to render services, and the second one was subject to completing services on the first production, then there can be an issue there. I think that there are going to be a number of situations where actors and other people have committed to multiple productions where they would have thought that there were adequate windows in between, and there may not be a priority built into the contracts. And I think on those, people are just going to have to work them out, and there's just going to have to be some degree of cooperation. Look, I think it's also important to remember that, and this question gets asked a lot, which is, what are the implications of force majeure provisions in contracts? So, if a contract has been put in hold, in a lot of contracts, the studio or the network has the right to suspend the period and apply a force majeure period. But most contracts also provide that the artist, the writer, the director also has an ability to, terminate if there is a force majeure period that extends beyond a certain time period. A lot of contracts have an 8-week period, in which case, the artist, director, writer has the ability to terminate. Some are, a little bit shorter. So there may well be circumstances where the individual involved, depending how long the suspension takes place, may be able to selectively make a decision. But I think, as I said at the outset, each case is going to have to be handled a little bit differently. There is going to have to be some cooperation amongst groups of people to try and accommodate the production, and they'll have to figure it out.
All right, this is a question for David. And it sort of was touched on earlier, but there's a lot of mention of things, calls with networks and studios and things moving forward. But have you actually had anything greenlit in the past few weeks, or is it just nothing?
No, I mean, I've had the way my cycle is working right now. I've actually either had clients coming off production. I'll just tell anecdotally, just a wild story. I had my client, Jonathan Hensley, was directing a movie up in Winnipeg, an action movie starring Liam Neeson. And literally a week before they were supposed to finish production, Canada started announcing all of their disciplinary actions and borders closing and everything else. And his crew of 109 all of a sudden got whittled down to a crew of 12. I mean, these were like the diehard people that were going to, just kind of go up the hill and finish it. Miraculously, he finishes it. They closed the borders to the extent where he couldn't get a flight out. He hitches a ride with one of the one of the crew guys who's driving like a 12-wheeler. 2 miles before he gets to the border of the United States, kind of in North Dakota area, the driver says, "I got to drop you off here because the manifest in my in my agreement is I can't bring anybody over the border." He has to get out and walk 2 miles across the border to get back into the truck to drive him to Minnesota, where eventually within a 24-hour period, he was able to, get a flight back from Denver, et cetera. So the long answer, I guess, to your question is, right now, most of the artists that I am working with are either in writing mode, post-production mode. And as I said before, I'm hoping that they're also writing things that we can then, sell when this thing, or package at least, when this thing comes down.
Question for our other producers, for Gary and for Scott. And this goes back to, productions traveling and also trying to keep things efficient. Did you have anything shooting overseas currently? I think similar to David's just story. Do you see things not shooting as much overseas, specifically up in Canada, where there's been so much production over the past couple of decades? Or do you think you're going to keep your productions more localized for the time being?
Well, I can say I have a project that is going to shoot in Australia, and we have two issues now with that. One is the travel and restrictions. The second is a lot of most of the Australian content that uses the system there takes advantage of federal and state tax incentives. And there is some discussion, because of the financial impact it's having on the country, that the budgets for those federal and state funding agencies are going to be cut significantly. And that's going to have an effect on both television, short form, feature films. So there's going to be, once this gets resolved and the federal government there decides, where they're going to steal in order to pay for some other areas of government importance, it's going to be a factor. And on this particular production, it is a very specific Australian story. So we're going to have to navigate both those issues once we're given the green flag to figure out how to move forward. I'm concerned that the funding model that we put together is going to be significantly affected, and we'll have to figure out what we do.
How about you, Scott?
Well, what's interesting is we were literally just about to launch a development company in Tel Aviv. We're supposed to launch it in March. And so we all know how valuable IP is, right? And we're talking about production, but I think that'll manifest into something really spectacular. And I think IP is also going to draw a bridge from Tel Aviv to Hollywood for what we're doing, but all over the world. Going back to earlier, thinking about, we ignored what happened in China and the devastation that followed. So hopefully we're going to learn and connect more as humanity. And I think creatively that should also benefit from it. I want to just say one more thing on an optimistic level. Anyone watching that had content, we've lost a lot of our really big film festivals. Tribeca was canceled, South by. The industry looks like it's being very proactive. I'm pretty sure I was reading CAA is going to create a brand new market at the end of the summer, in the fall, to create exposure for those kind of projects that have been missing out. And I think so that's a lot, there's a lot of good to look forward to with what we're doing in the industry, and there won't be complete loss from those kind of incidents.
Well, and that's a nice dovetail into this next question, which I think would be great for our two composers here, which is, you mentioned a lot of production shutting down, that's obvious, but are you seeing other types of production that are ramping up and people getting creative in other ways? Animation would be one example of that. Podcast would be another. Anecdotally, are either of you seeing much of an uptick on those types of productions?
I mean, I don't, and I'm not currently working on anything that is animated, but I have heard of that. Like I've seen and heard of people like continuing that work, because those are a bunch of people working just in their houses or in their solitary studios. But in terms of the stuff that I'm working on, most of it is just either already in this post-production phase, which, we're just posting all individually in our own houses, doing all of the post work. I've seen people set up mix studios in their house, and I know we're mixing a couple of things where one mixer is in one apartment on one street, and another, the FX mixer is on another apartment, and they're talking out the window to each other. It's actually quite interesting seeing how that's going. But I haven't seen anything like ramping up production in anything that I'm working on.
How about you, Gabriel?
I've sort of got I'm sort of in the middle of 3 different waves of that. I don't know if it's going to, I mean, other than what we've talked about in terms of the overall glut that I think is going to be inevitable after this, I have stuff that, like network stuff that was finishing. I have streaming stuff that was, like I do a Disney Plus show that was in the middle of production, and they're just pausing. They just hit the pause button altogether. They don't do, they're not posting anything. They're not shooting anything. They're just sort of waiting. And I think the thing that they are doing is that they're finishing the writing of the series. So if they were on episode 3 or whatever in the writing of a show that was already going for 10 or 11, they're just continuing the writing, so that will, at least that aspect will be done, and they can focus on that. And then when it's time to shoot, they can shoot full throttle. So that will be, they're sort of rearranging of schedules in that way. And then for pilots is sort of there's many different options as to what could happen with that. There's pilots that also had to just hit the pause button, that are doing, and I know of at least one of the ones that I'm working on, where there's a pilot that has a mini writer's room, where they're writing, I guess, the second episode of what would potentially be a series, a pilot where there wouldn't have been a second episode written without this event happening. So in that case, the writers are working in the same way that they're working on this Disney Plus show, remotely. And then so it'll be sort of like a different pilot situation than you would normally have. They're not going to shoot the pilot right away. They will wait until they're allowed to shoot again, and then they'll have 2 episodes written. So it'll just be sort of like a change in the way things work. And in some ways, that is refreshing, because then you have a new conceptual idea for what the show could be by knowing what a second episode could be. And that's interesting.
Question for you, Michael, since you're transactionally making so many deals, how has this affected in these few short weeks, the types of things you look for in the deals that have come across your desk, or that will come across your desk, in the coming months? Has it really, really shifted your line of thinking in significant ways?
I think it has. I think it really depends on the facts and circumstances. When you have a movie that's ready to go and it's canceled, and hopefully you can get it postponed as opposed to canceled. And then you have situations, as Craig had explained, in terms of what a force majeure is. When that happened, when there was a Writers Guild strike, it was one solution. Sometimes people, Studio One or Streamer One reconciles their schedule with Streamer Two, but sometimes they'll say you can have this person in first position, but you have to pay us a certain amount of money because we're going to have to delay our production. So there's all sorts of things. Before all of this started, the template, was already starting to shift. The streamers, like Netflix, wanted to buy the back end. They, if they're going to pay for it, they want to own it. So they want to be able to buy your back end out and create their own library so they can compete with the Disney Pluses and HBO, AT&Ts of the world. And I think all of that, you have to think about everything, because what especially the big studios went and this was the time where they could throw anything but, including the kitchen sink, into their contracts and make them as tough as they could reasonably expect them to be, or try to get them to be. It's sort of like, the best example I can give probably is when Fox Channel, not Fox News Channel, but Fox, the network, started out, they basically said if they sold a program to an affiliated company of Fox, that there wasn't any obligation to do it on an arm's length transaction. You could challenge it sometimes they said you couldn't challenge it. So all of these things, it's made, full employment for lawyers and agents and managers, but it's created a lot of, new questions that you have to ask yourself when you're negotiating the agreement, or more importantly, when you have to deal with the 50 pages of contract that are sent to you. That by the way, for which your client can't get paid until he signed it, and they're not prepared to spend 4 hours on the phone with you negotiating it.
Well, now it's a 51-page contract, probably,
Right.
you know, after all that.
Exactly.
All right, so last question, and this applies to everyone. We're just going to go in a circle. It's probably the most important question, but what should people be watching right now? David, you kind of touched on it, but I'm going to go around and get everyone's top recommendations. And so, top left corner for me is Jeff. Jeff, what is your top recommendation right now?
To watch?
Watch, read, listen to, you know, anything to pass all this time.
You know, I would say just stop doing what I'm doing, which is obsessing about reading news articles. I was up all night last night reading, and it's really quite bad for me anyway. You know, there's so much content out there. You know, I hate to say this, but because I hate to be shamelessly self-promoting, on Hulu, all three of the first three seasons of Fargo are now up, and it's a really engaging show to watch, and it's very entertaining. So I would say that's a good thing to sit back and give yourself like a week to watch all 30 episodes.
All right. How about you, Greg?
You know, it's funny because I haven't had enough time in the last couple of years to watch a lot of television, and now I find in my spare time I'm doing it. I will say, as someone who was always a huge Trekkie fan and a huge fan of Next Generation, watching Picard has been just truly, you know, phenomenal. The acting is great. The storyline is great. And actually, what I've really enjoyed is that it's not something you can sit and binge watch. You had to do as you did with Game of Thrones, which is watch, you know, one episode a week when it was released. And you know, there's an opportunity in this time to do a lot of binge watching, but there's actually also something really nice about the expectation that once a week you're going to be able to tune in and watch something. And I agree, we've all become too obsessed with the news and it's hard to avoid, but actually watching something that just takes you out of your mind into a great place and you just sit back and enjoy. It's so if you haven't watched that, I have no qualms in promoting something that one of our panelists has been involved in.
How about yourself, David? You mentioned a couple already, but I don't know if you have any other recs to pass on.
Those are the two that just keep on coming to mind because they make me laugh and they make me feel good. I mean, I agree with everybody who's been speaking. I'm a news junkie to begin with, and I've been up till like 2, 3 in the morning, just, you know, dealing with all the anxiety that comes from, you know, reading the news that does me no good anymore. But I say curb your enthusiasm because I think this season, especially the last few episodes of the season, were just absolutely genius, belly laughing, you know, I just had me in stitches. And I really do love this show, Better Things, Pamela Adlon's show, you know, about a single mother bringing up her 3 precocious daughters. It's just these beautiful moments of life and the fleeting moments of life. I mean, one of the things that I've also been trying to do is watch and listen to nature. You know, I'm lucky I have a backyard where I see the trees and you know, now that there's no traffic noise, just the kind of silence and the life around me. You know, that's the message that's been speaking to me loud and clear, which is like, you know, look in awe of what this planet and certainly this community, Los Angeles, has to offer.
Gary?
I'll do a little self-promotion. As of today, our series Community is on Netflix, so you can watch all 6 seasons of Community for those who want to rediscover it or for those who have never saw it and want to see it now. But we're doing classic movies here. We, you know, decided to go back and look at some things we hadn't watched in years and some that our kids hadn't watched. So I would encourage people to take an opportunity to, you know, educate yourself and remind yourself of some of the great filmmaking that has been done over the last, you know, 40, 50 years. It's a good time to do that.
Gabriel?
my father lives in Israel, and he's watching this show called Shtisel, which I had not heard of. I was a big fan of Fauda, which is, I mean, if you haven't seen Fauda and you're watching this panel, you probably need to watch Fauda. In fact, I had to go, I do this show, a High School Musical, the series for Disney Plus, and I had to go to where they shoot it in Salt Lake. And we were done for the day, and I watched the entire first season from 6 p.m. to about 2 a.m. that night. And I was just like, my stress level was very high, but in the best way. This is my list. I have a list of stuff that I'm supposed to watch. And it doesn't get shorter, though. It only gets longer. I mean, I can tell you some of the things that are, there's like a Ray Manzarek Riders on the Storm thing on YouTube I'm supposed to watch. I mean, I've never seen The Sopranos.
Wow.
I didn't watch Game of Thrones. I'm a terrible person. I'm a terrible person. I don't know what to tell you about it. Billions. I actually watched the first season and a half of Billions. And I love it, and I have not picked it back up. There's another show called Unorthodox, which is a new show that I would like to see. I mean, there's so much stuff. We watched The Fifth Element with the kids the other night. To me, that's actually the challenge, is finding something old that your kids don't completely dismiss because it's old. It's difficult to make them watch something when the sound comes on and it's kind of like warbly. And that is true of that movie, but they did love The Fifth Element. So at least we got that. They hated Dumb and Dumber.
Kids hated it also. But they love High School Musical. They
do love High School Musical.
We actually just watched Best in Show with the kids, and they loved it.
Ooh, yeah, good one. I'm gonna put that.
Kids are also watching The Price is Right for some reason. That's
what you do when you stay home sick. You watch The Price is Right.
Exactly, and we're sick for a while. Michael, how about yourself? What recommendations?
Well, I would add on. I just saw Unorthodox, which is basically an Israel-German co-production. Or it was filmed in a lot of it in Berlin, some in Brooklyn, and it's in Yiddish and English. So you talk about extending culture and language. It doesn't get more extended or pure than that sort of basis. And then, of course, I'm very biased about The Tiger because it's tapped. Well, my partner, Linda Lichter, was involved in the negotiations for the producer and director, but also it seems to have tapped into the zeitgeist of everybody because it's so different than anything that you would normally see on television, other than maybe a National Geographic special or something. So those are my favorites. So there's a lot of good stuff. Stetzel's good, Fauda's good. Israel's got some formats that it's exported or actually made that have been really, really capturing people's imaginations and really making everyone happy about seeing them, even though the subject matter sometimes, like Unorthodox is a story of a woman who's in an arranged marriage in a Hasidic community, the Satmar community in New York, and escapes to Berlin from this whole oppressive kind of situation she's in. But it's really, really interesting. And the woman who's one of the lead actresses was also in Shtisel. So interesting.
Last but not least, Scott.
Yeah, I'm glad everyone's bringing up the Israeli content. I mean, the door's like slightly ajar there. They're really starting to produce some really fantastic stuff that's hitting the global market. Fauda's new season's dropping in 3 weeks. I'm sure everyone's excited for that.
Can't wait for that.
When Heroes Fly, it was big for them. I think a show called False Flag. And they're all starting to sell them here, and they're rebooting them in English. There's another one called The Baker and the Beauty that I think is just about to premiere this week in English, but the Israeli versions are great. If you guys want to laugh, Veep, I think, is just as original and brilliant as there's ever been. And I just got hooked on Schitt's Creek, which is absolutely genius. Absolutely. If you get into it, my gosh. If you guys like gritty, like The Wire gritty, there's two amazing mob gritty shows. One's called Gomorrah. And it is incredible. Unfortunately, there's only 2 seasons out because the other 2 seasons are sitting on the Weinstein shelf. and I have no idea how we're going to get them. They're all tied up with that. And then there's another one called Suburra, also like this gritty mob type Italian show. They're really fantastic.
All right. Well, thank you all. I think it was a really great.
So before we end, sorry.
Yeah, throw it to Ari.
Here. Noah, what's your favorite recommendation at the moment?
Oh, well, yeah, like everyone else, Tiger King is, I think, the one thing we can all agree on as a society right now. Price is Right, I just mentioned. And I don't really get to control the remote, but we're doing a lot of the classic movies. And, but I think, Gabriel, to your point, I really wanted to show the kids Stand By Me, and they just rejected it. So we're going to push that down their throat this weekend. They're going to watch it. They rejected just on the idea of it. So
we did that same thing with To Catch a Thief. We pushed it down their throat. They watched it, and they were fine. They were fine with it.
Exactly.
If they watch Goonies, they can watch Stand By Me. You got to show them the classics. You got to just throw them. Anyhow, I'll give my recommendations along the Israel lines. Remakes Homeland's in its final season, which is an amazing show, and was an Israeli adaptation. Euphoria, for anybody that hasn't seen it, another adaptation from an Israeli show, which is amazing. And then two others, Hot Boy, which a lot of people haven't seen, which I thought was great, which they brought back and redid with, I think it was LeBron and Maverick Carter and Drake brought it back. And then what's another one? Narcos is obviously a great show, which they just came out with a new season. So anyhow, thank you guys so much for everybody that watched. Thank you everybody in the panel. Honestly, this is like amazing discussion. I think people got a lot of it. I got some texts and emails how people thought this was absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much. Thank you, Noah and Matthew, who we just have a little logo from for helping to coordinate all this behind the scenes. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well.
Take care.
Bye.